Hi friends, welcome home to my channel. My name is Kel and I'm a graphic designer. Now, to start off this video, two things I want to acknowledge. First one, my glasses. They're pink. I'm aware. They're my new prescription glasses and I was prescribed migraine lenses. So that's one thing. The second thing that I'm going to address, I hate holding a microphone, but it is so hard to rig my other microphone for this setup. I'd rather just not do it and use my Rode mic. And instead of holding it by a little tiny thing, I taped it to a ruler. So I hope this works. So I'm 28 years old, and in graphic design years, that means I am middle-aged approaching geriatric. But I feel like I've lived 1,000 lives since I ventured into the world of graphic design over 10 years ago now, and it's really shaped me into the person I am today. A decade ago, I began my study in graphic design, and it has been the best decision of my life, and I've honestly never looked back. I've never wanted it any other way. Design gave me the missing piece to my creative identity as a teenager, and as an adult, it became my entire community. I've never told my career story because I feel like it's kind of boring, or it doesn't really match the online persona I have today. But that's not really something I believe anymore, and I think sharing the trials and tribulations of a budding graphic designer for the community at large is a net positive, so we can maybe, as graphic design elders, improve the community and general industry somewhat for the next generation of designers so they don't have to suffer in the same ways we did. And that's something I really want to see change in the community, especially with older generations of designers. I really would like to see people be more helpful to new and up-and-coming designers. My career is somewhat unusual, both in my general profession and how I ended up doing what I do now, which is merchandise design. My route here was indirect and, let me tell you, full of roadblocks. I was so unhappy to the point where I was making arrangements to leave design fairly early in my career. I started at such a young age and I didn't make any money for the longest time. I didn't have a fallback plan. I didn't have a place I could move into to take some time off and reset. I hated literally every single job that I had. Nothing fulfilled me creatively. I didn't know what was right, what was wrong, what made a good team versus what made a bad team. And all I knew was that I needed to keep working so I could keep a roof over my head and my fridge full of food and keep the lights on. And I knew this whole time that I deserved more, but I didn't really know how to get there. And it wasn't necessarily even something I actively thought, because it started to get hammered into my head that I didn't actually deserve anything more. I didn't deserve anything greater than the treatment that I was getting. So I was just hoping that it would maybe get better. I just had no idea how to get to that point. So the year is 2012. I am 15 and I'm taking my first graphic design class in high school to fulfill a tech requirement. In middle school, I was given a pirated copy of Photoshop on a disc, and I used it to make bootleg t-shirts and posters for my friends for mostly the Beatles and Taylor Swift. And throughout high school, graphic design kind of became my focus for all of my art classes, particularly my AP art portfolio. More specifically, graphic design in the music industry became my primary concentration for my AP test. I grew up in the late 2000s, early 2010s stan culture online, so I used graphic design to channel my obsession into a new form of art, which was just the digital version of the collages that I had been making physically for years prior. So when it came time to apply for college, I had initially planned on going to school for veterinary science, and after an extensive discussion with my art teacher that I had all through high school, I ended up changing course entirely, and I decided to pursue art. I found FITM, the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising in LA, and I applied to their fashion design program. I grew up sewing. I loved Project Runway. I had the Project Runway sewing machine, and I also grew up watching RuPaul's Drag Race, so I thought fashion design would be the best major for me. So in fall of 2014, I moved to LA to start at FITM in fashion design. One of my roommates was a graphic design major, and I spent my entire first quarter at FITM just fawning over how much fun her projects looked and how boring my draping classes looked. So by the end of that quarter, I had changed my major to graphic design. So during my time at FITM, I took some really odd classes, and in hindsight, I'm really glad that I took these classes because I feel like these types of classes are not typically offered at a traditional art school. One of the classes that like completely changed the trajectory of my life was a class called Brand X, and it was taught by Kevin Reagan. He is a Grammy-winning packaging designer and art director. He designed a cover for Foo Fighters, which is hilarious because I would also go on to design a cover for Foo Fighters, but we'll touch on that a little bit later in this video. So Brand X was treated like an album rollout campaign. So we would pick an album to redesign, so that was the entire album packaging, and we would do like the packaging, the promo, posters, merchandise, ads, general ethos of the album, everything. And it was one of the hardest classes I took at FITM. It was one of the hardest classes I took at FITM because Kevin Reagan was not a professor for the faint of heart, and I am of the faint of heart. He was incredibly harsh, and he really challenged me creatively. The things he said really hurt me, and they hurt because I knew deep down that he unfortunately was right about the things that he was saying. Just for example, the typical class went like, we would print out our 15 versions of whatever we did that week. So like the back of an album cover, we'd print out 15 designs or iterations of a design, tape them all up on the wall, and then he would go through them one by one and tell us what he didn't like, and rarely what he did like, but mostly what he didn't like. And if he really didn't like it, he would just rip it off the wall. And I definitely cried a few times in his class, but the persistence I learned was purely out of spite to prove him wrong that I could do something better, or yes, prove him right that I could do something better. So my first year in school, I worked in coffee shops as a barista, and I really liked it. I made fairly good money, but I knew that I needed to make a transition to working in design. I was only 19, but between the pressure from FITM and also my parents, it was very obvious that I needed to find an internship in design as soon as possible. My first internship came from a very strange man I met when I was working at Verve. He had founded a startup, and he was offering to pay me $500 a month to do essentially whatever graphics he wanted for the company. There was not any legal paperwork. I was paid completely under the table. It wasn't a very overwhelming job, and the people I worked with were surprisingly really nice, but I eventually left for a more real internship that FITM actually recognized as an internship, and I was paid legally and above board, so I could actually start my career, if you will. And after I quit, the startup, I think, ended shortly after that. So in January of 2016, I got my first real design internship at a beauty packaging and marketing agency, I think. I made $18 an hour, which was pretty good for the time, especially as an intern. I worked 20 hours a week while still going to school full time. As an intern, I did the classic intern work. I was getting coffee, I was rearranging packaging bottles, helping prep for client meetings, and on occasion, I would get to design an e-blast or two. Now, I felt sort of out of place there, despite being in a team of really kind people, and it was also a team of majority women, but I still felt really unprepared and I knew nothing. So in June of 2016, I graduated from FITM with my Associate of Arts degree in graphic design. Leading up to graduation, the agency that I worked for had offered me a full-time position as a contractor, meaning they wanted me there 40 hours a week, but I wasn't getting any benefits. So I wasn't getting health insurance. I wasn't getting paid time off, none of that. So I graduated on a Saturday, and then Monday morning, I walked into my first full-time job as a graphic designer at the ripe age of 20 years old. So making the shift from part-time design work and going to school full-time to full-time design work was really hard for me, especially at such a young age. I fortunately lived really close to the studio, so on my lunch breaks, I would go home and cry for an hour and then go back into work. I was really overwhelmed with the general transition of everything. I remember being so exhausted all the time, and I still feel like I didn't belong there, I wasn't good enough. The whole time I just felt like I wasn't good enough. So a couple months later, I quit without another job offer, and I began my first panic of many panics to come in the future of finding a new job, and this time also finding a new apartment. I took the first job I could find, and I signed a lease at an apartment that didn't require me to have any job history, pay stubs, cosigner, or guarantor, so red flag. I moved into this really sketchy apartment on a Saturday, and then Monday morning I started my new job. A couple days after I had started my new job, I found out that my apartment was completely infested with roaches. This was shocking news to me, given that the apartment was in an alleyway on the ground floor by USC with the world's smallest windows, and they had bars on the windows, and the bars wouldn't move in case there was a fire, so that was fun. But yeah, to my shock, it was infested with roaches, so I had to move out. My new job was in Culver City, and it was nowhere near a metro line, my primary method of transportation, so I had to take a combination of the metro line out as far as possible and either take the bus, and sometimes if I was feeling a little spendy, I would take an Uber 5 minutes to get to the office. The job was at a startup agency, I think. It was a marketing agency with a bunch of clients that I had never heard of. There were like 10 of us total, and we worked in this huge corporate office with a bunch of cubicles. The team went out to happy hours that I could not attend as I was under 21 still. I didn't hate the work that I was doing, but it started to extend far beyond what the typical role would be for a graphic designer, and they just kind of wrote it off as like, oh, that's just what it's like working for a startup. But I became kind of like a web designer. I became a photographer, content creator, a model, and I had like an art director, my first art director, who really rubbed me the wrong way because he truly had no idea how to be an art director nor a graphic designer. So obviously we started to butt heads, and I am really stubborn, and he was a man with a giant ego. One day he was on my ass because I didn't want to design a logo in Photoshop. I was doing an Illustrator like a normal person, and he was upset as he did not know Illustrator, and he didn't care to hear me out as to why something that needs to be a vector-based file should be done in Illustrator. LOL. So it was around like 3 p.m. that day. I got called into my first HR meeting with the AD, the CEO, and someone from HR. And I was fired for insubordination effective immediately, and I would be escorted out of the office by security. So obviously started crying immediately. And I was so upset because I had like extended myself so far beyond what was asked of me when I first started. And I was doing my best, and obviously working for a man with an ego who obviously knew so much more than me was obviously a problem. And I had only worked there for 3 months, but getting fired like this made me feel like I was this tall. I was literally so tiny. I was completely helpless. So I was completely crushed, and I remember stepping outside the office after I was escorted out, and I called my parents, and I was like still crying, and I had to break the news to them that I had just lost the job that I really desperately needed. So I got on the bus, took it to the train station, went home. So about a month later, in November of 2016, which was around the time I started posting on YouTube, I started a new job at a phone case company designing phone cases. And this job offer was like a lifeline to me. The boss / CEO felt like a queer twin flame to me. He was one of the first people that I had ever met that I could connect to on like a fundamental, deep, emotional, and creative level. But the position was hard. I was the only designer, and I was the only general creative person, but I really loved what I did. I did only make $14 an hour, but I absolutely loved designing something, see it get made, go out into the world, and I could like take photos of it. I could set up these content shoots, upload them to our website, post them on like the company socials. And it was the first time that I had designed something, and then I could walk into what was like the gold standard of the time, Urban Outfitters, and see my design there. Now I have a ton of stuff in Urban Outfitters all the time. It's kind of like, it's still cool to me, but it was the first time that I could go into like my favorite store and see something that I designed in packaging that I designed that was really cool. So over the next like 8 months, I hired my first junior designer. I met with a bunch of buyers from like major department stores, and I went to my first work conference in Vegas. I went to CES, and I was kicked out of a conference room at the convention. Plate, I was doing okay. I was very micromanaged, and I had to sketch out every single Instagram concept like weeks and weeks ahead of time, run the sketches by her before I could go out and shoot any content. And the same thing for the campaigns. I had to create an extensive shot list with like great detail for her to approve each and every one of these shots. And it's not like the work that I was leading or creating was poor. I just feel like it wasn't something that she saw for the vision of the company. And this was the first time I started having like actual like mental breakdowns at work, whether it was like at my desk, which was like really humiliating. And sometimes I would like go to the bathroom, I would go walk around the building on my lunch break and cry. And I felt like I was producing really high quality work in a field that I really had no experience in. I didn't go to school for it. I didn't have any like professional training. So when the iPhone 10 keynote came out, so this was in 2017, we learned that we had disastrously predicted the wrong colors for the products from Apple. meaning all of the content that we had shot with dummy products was wrong, and now we needed to go back and correct all of it. Obviously, this is a really big launch for a phone case company, so to have things go wrong is so bad. And it pushed me to the brink, and I quit a few weeks later. Of course, no backup plan, no job offer. I just had like a couple freelance clients I had on the side that I thought would sustain me a little bit until I could find new work. Since I quit, I did not qualify for any unemployment, and the few clients that I had brought me about $1,000 a month, which is good for starting out, but it is not enough to sustain yourself when you're living in Los Angeles. Things were really hard, and it was a really dark period of my career, and I did pretty much whatever I could to make money. I applied to so many jobs every single day. I spent hours and hours doing that every single day, but the end of the year is truly like the worst time to find work. Alas, 2 months later, in January of 2018, I started a job at a branding agency in Pasadena as a graphic designer, but this time I was still a contractor. At first, this seemed like a place that I could settle for a bit and kind of learn like the agency life. It was something that I had heard so much about, but I didn't know anyone who actually like worked extensively in an agency, so this was a good opportunity for me to really settle. And man, oh man, once again, I was wrong. So I made $25 an hour, which was the most money I'd ever made up to that point. So I thought I was doing pretty well for myself. It was very standard agency work. So we were doing like e-blasts, in-store signage, social media graphics, web banners, some food packaging. Nothing crazy, but very standard. The agency was really small. It was, I think, 6 of us at the time. There were 3 designers, a project manager, an office manager, and the CEO. And of course, as time progressed, I learned how bizarre and hostile the CEO was, and just kind of insane. One night, I received an email with a screenshot of a working file of an e-blast that I was working on that day with rulers that she pulled in, showing pieces of text that had not been perfectly aligned to this ruler. And I don't remember exactly what the email said, but it was something along the lines of, I'm not a careful designer, and these are not promising signs of someone she would want to hire full-time. And I was still not full-time working for her, even though I'd been working for her for months, but she knew I wanted a full-time position because I needed benefits. So this email kind of shocked me, and it felt weirdly invasive to go into an unfinished file of one of her designers after hours, drag guides in, screenshot it, and then send it to the designer with notes about their professional behavior. And it felt weird because it is weird. This is not normal behavior. So as she became kind of increasingly insane, the rest of the team, really anyone non-management, so the 4 of us, it was the office manager, or I guess like she was in management. So everyone except for the CEO and the office manager became very close. So that was just the 4 of us. And we kind of bonded over how poorly we were treated and how like dumb the work was that we were doing. And she would say like crazy offensive stuff, just completely off the rails at random. She would make some pretty offhand racist comments, and she barred one of the designers from speaking on client calls because he had an accent, even though he was perfectly understandable. And she also like incessantly asked me about my sister's ADHD and when they decided to start stimulants and when she should start her 6-year-old son on stimulants. And I obviously was exhibiting ADHD symptoms at the time, and I think that was part of the problem that she had with me, is that she didn't exactly know what ADHD was and just knew something was wrong with me and maybe something was up with her son, and she kind of took that out on me. She also proudly bragged that she hired designers straight out of college because they were easier to manipulate into the designers that she would want to hire, and more so like younger versions of herself. And what she looked for were people who really respected authority and hierarchy within an agency setting, and they followed directions and they never messed up. And she would say this because she had found a significant amount of success earlier in her career, so she thinks that the methods and the ways that she went about doing that were the ways in which things should be done. And one day, one fateful day, a fate was bestowed upon me like I had been cursed by 10,000 suns. I had been working on an in-store handheld menu for one of our food clients for like weeks, and I had gone off to print during that time. And this menu was just wall of text. It was well over 100 text boxes with item names, descriptions, substitutions, sizes, calorie counts, price, whole 9 yards. And for whatever reason, I opened this file and I noticed a single error. And that error would end up costing me my sanity. And it wasn't a spelling error. It wasn't a misaligned piece of type that wasn't aligned to a guide or a grid. It was a calorie mistype under my favorite drink in the world, lemonade. And the calorie count should have read 70 when it read 110. And the number had simply been copied and pasted from the drink above. And when you're doing stuff like this, you are avoiding manually typing stuff as much as possible because that's where errors can occur. So you are copying and pasting everything from a document that has already been proofread. So I decided to do the right thing. Mistake. And I told my boss. And hell broke loose. I had no idea how bad it could get, and things got so bad. I laugh about it now, but it was horrible at the time. So I was immediately taken into a conference room with my boss and the office manager, and we called up the marketing director of the client, and I had to tell them that I sent something to print with a typo in it. And I was completely panicking. Nothing like that had ever happened to me. And the questions began, and my boss was incessantly asking over and over and over, how did this happen? And she never got the answer that she sought because it's a loaded question. There's no like easy, satisfying answer for something like that. And I told her repeatedly that it was just an honest mistake. And because she was asking how it happened, I pointed a finger at the office manager who signed off on the actual file going to print, and she said, I'm not going to send this to the proofreader. I'm going to send it to print. So we both took responsibility for sending it to print because we were both involved in making the error. I mistyped it in the art. She decided to not send it to the proofreader. So at this point in the meeting, I was crying. And I was apologizing profusely because I felt so horrible, not for my boss, but like for the client. I felt really bad that I let the client down. And the office manager offered to pay for the reprints. It was $400 to reprint the in-store menus, or she could split the cost with me. And she also like weirdly insinuated that I should pay for it. And that was something I literally could not afford at all. And as the discussion went on, my boss began to shift that blame entirely onto me and my inability to execute at a professional level. And she continuously hammered home that this begins at the designer level. It begins in the art file, and I shouldn't rely on others to catch my errors. I should be proofreading my stuff. Therefore, I should be catching the errors, and I shouldn't have to rely on the project manager, the office manager, or a proofreader to catch those mistakes. They are merely a fallback plan. If you've ever worked on a project like this, you know how difficult it is to notice mistakes. Your brain does not recognize those things. If you're staring at a wall of text for weeks on end, you're not going to notice those mistakes, and that's why I noticed the mistake after I had finished the project. Time had gone by and I opened it again and I noticed the mistake. So I went home crying. My face was so swollen. I remember I have a picture somewhere in my iCloud of my face being so swollen from crying. My makeup had long left my face, and that was the beginning of a very, very long, painful journey. So over the coming months, every few days, sometimes every day, sometimes more than once a day, I would be brought into a conference room alone to talk about my print mistake. Sometimes it was alone with the CEO, sometimes it was with the office manager, and over again, I was told that I lacked humility, professionalism, and general attention to detail. That's what it always came back to, is I lacked attention to detail. And I could have cost the company really their only good client. I was still asked repeatedly how I let something like this happen, and I gave her the same answer I gave her on the day that I had discovered it, that it was an honest mistake and I was working to improve my processes to prevent it from happening again. I was told that I was worthless and I'll never amount to a professional that could find any level of success due to my lack of attention to detail, unprofessionalism, and general laziness. I was put on numerous PIPs, or a performance improvement plan. And if you've ever worked a corporate job, you do not want to be put on a PIP. It is a bad thing. It's essentially like the last step HR will put you on before they fire you, but she couldn't fire me because she really needed me. She really struggled to hire other designers because the work sucked, the pay really wasn't that great, and everyone except for the CEO and the office manager was miserable, and we were all looking for new jobs, but none of us could find new jobs. So this was the summer of 2018, and I was frantically applying for jobs like it was a pastime for me. When the boss and the office manager would go offsite for a client meeting or whatever the hell they did, sometimes they would disappear for hours on end. The second that office door closed and we saw the car pull out of the office parking lot, our computers were being turned off. Our chairs were spun around and we immediately would have a kiki and talk about whatever bullshit was going on. And we would just hang out. We would go out to lunch. We would apply for jobs. So we would watch movies. And a frequent topic of discussion during these hours when they would be gone was the way that I was being treated over this damn print error, because it was taking so much time out of my day and my coworkers' days because they would have to pick up the slack of my work not being done because I was being taken into a conference room to be, belittled for 45 minutes about how dumb I am. So I started having anxiety attacks, something that I never had, on my way to work on the train, and I had to pick up meditating as a way of mitigating said anxiety attacks because, again, I didn't have health insurance. So my hair started falling out, and that's like when I knew things really started to get bad for me mentally, and I was so scared to come into work every day because I knew that there was going to be a dedicated time where I would be berated over being shitty and that I would never amount to anything. So obviously I'm not going to be looking forward to going to work. And the only thing that made me go every day, other than the paycheck, was my coworkers. I love them. Even to this day, I adore them. And we were all in such a shitty situation and they were all still treated so horribly, but it became kind of like ridiculous at this point. So about 3 months after my fatal print error, I got a phone interview with Live Nation. I had forgotten I even applied to Live Nation because I was just applying en masse to so many jobs every day that it had been honestly months since I applied for that job. I think I actually applied for the job around the time I made the print mistake. I had done so many interviews with other companies and I had gotten to the final round of interviews so many times, but I never actually got an offer. So I was like a broken soldier at this point. And I would take all of my interviews on my lunch breaks and I would just like walk around the building or go into a conference room and take like a private call just so I could like avoid being within earshot of anyone from management. And then came an in-person interview request at the Hollywood location for Live Nation, which was like the other side of the planet from where I was working in Pasadena. And that's when I had to come up with my laundry list of lies as to why I couldn't come into work that day. I was sick, at a doctor's appointment, didn't have health insurance, wasn't seeing a doctor. I had a vet appointment, my apartment flooded. I was coming up with anything to avoid them catching on to me, but I don't think they ever did because everybody was kind of doing the same thing and they were so clueless. Like management was so clueless as to seeing that everybody was trying to look for a way out. So when I applied for the job at Live Nation, I didn't know it was in merchandise. I kind of assumed that it was in like digital marketing, and I had no merchandise experience at the time, but I did have an enthusiastic passion for art and music, and I wanted to work for probably like a label. And I had applied to jobs at record labels before, but I had never heard anything. So during my interviews, I think the Live Nation team saw that I had like this great enthusiasm for creativity and general art, and also being like a huge music fan. And everyone there was also like an artist to their core. They all dressed really cool. They had tattoos, they had cool hair, and they were also just like really big fans of music. So 4 interviews, and a month later, I got a call on my lunch break when I was still working in Pasadena, and it was the woman from HR who I did my first phone interview with. And she said the words that completely changed my life. Live Nation would like to formally extend you an offer of employment in the merchandise department in the role of junior graphic designer. And the tears that shot out of my face at the speed of light and my knees soon meeting the ground, I was like speechless that I could only make like noises. And I immediately accepted the offer. It was truly like one of the greatest phone calls I've ever received. So I told my coworker, and she was completely over the moon for me because she was also trying to get out. And after my lunch, I went straight to my boss and I said, we need to have our private one-on-one meeting. And I knew we were having one anyway because it was time for my daily beratement over how stupid I am. So instead of her going on her normal tirade about how much she hated me, instead I got to tell her, today is my last day. I didn't give her 2 weeks. I didn't want to give her any other details other than I had another offer and today was my last day. And she was shocked, completely shocked. But I didn't want to give her any more details because honestly, she didn't deserve it. She didn't deserve any more of my time for how horrible she was to me, and I recognize it more in hindsight now. She did not deserve a dime of my time. And I was also really afraid of her because she had hired a private investigator in the past to go after someone. So this was someone who was vengeful and genuinely really scary. So I didn't want to tell her anything more in case she decided to go after my next employer because she was completely 100% the kind to do that. So to get one last nail in the coffin for me, she made me spend the rest of the day going through and showing her and the project manager, not the office manager, but one of my friends, go through every single file I touched since I started working there. So it was about 10 months work. And so it was about 10 months worth of work to make sure that the files were still on my computer and they were also in the company's server and I didn't sabotage them. So for hours, the rest of the day, one by one, toggling through files to make sure I didn't ruin them. I don't know how I would even do that in the short time span that I had. Train ride home, man. I'll never forget it. It was beautiful. The sun was setting. I had just gotten a couple grand in my pocket from my cashed out vacation time because I was eventually hired full time, but I had all this PTO that I didn't use, so I cashed it out and I went home. I took a couple weeks off before I started at Live Nation, and it was like the first time off where I was able to like truly relax. I went shopping, I hung out with my friends, and it was just like, oh my God, mwah, such a good time. So I started at Live Nation in November of 2018 and completely hit the ground running. I had an enthusiastic team of creative people who really cared about what we did because what we did was actually really cool and not pharmaceutical brochures. Although my 3 fellow designers, so there were four full-time designers, the other 3 were all men, but they were incredibly kind, they were welcoming, they were helpful, they were funny, and they genuinely wanted me to succeed as much as they wanted themselves to succeed. So it was very much like a team effort. And whenever one of us was having like kind of a creative problem, like we were working through a design and it wasn't like, you know, turning the page into kind of like the final iteration of it, we would pull up a chair to their desk and we would sit there and just talk through options. We would click through, we'd try different things out, we'd try different edits, try different fonts, look at it from 20 feet away, you know. And I think that really pushed us creatively to improve as a collective. And all 4 of us had such great respect for one another that the feedback was really effective. And I think that's when feedback is the most helpful, is when it is coming from someone you respect and you know that person is rooting for you and not rooting against you. And it truly made me a significantly better designer. Management was also really amazing. There were more managers than there were designers because we were also freelancing a lot of stuff out, so we needed more managers to manage freelancers. But I think that helped, you know, kind of take a lot of the admin work off of the designers and let them just focus solely on art. And the person who oversaw the entire department is one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. She is an artist, like to her core, and that energy transcended into everything in the office. And she cultivated this really deep creative energy over anything else. And she saw something in me that I never saw. And she believed in me. And because she was an artist before everything else, that's also something that like I see in myself. It really allowed me to have this space and the support I needed to fully come into myself as a true creative. I worked on so many amazing projects during my time there. I got my first big Madonna approval, which was really cool because it was when she was doing a whole rollout. I did my iconic Jonas Brothers t-shirt that people still send me pictures to this day, and my Wu-Tang shirt that people still ask me about, did it so bad. Womp womp. Then came March of 2020. We were sent home like the rest of the world, you know? And I worked from home for about a month and a half. One of the last projects that I worked on was a merch campaign for Foo Fighters' up-and-coming album, Medicine at Midnight. I had done a couple of t-shirts and a slip mat and a couple other like COVID accessories like masks and hand sanitizer. A couple days after that, I was furloughed and obviously completely shattered. I was so sad because that was like my dream job. I worked like a fake TV cartoon job. That's not like a real job people have. People don't get to go into work and design a t-shirt for like a rock star. Like that's awesome. So I was so upset because I wanted to stay there for years. So a few weeks after I was furloughed, my wonderful boss, who I still adore, called me and gave me more news that would completely change the trajectory of my life. Dave Grohl loved the art that I did for the slip mat weeks prior before I was furloughed. He loved that so much that he wanted to change the album artwork that had already been done, the artwork that we had been using in the merch designs. He wanted to change from that album artwork to the slip mat art that I did. And let me tell you, gag of the century, I was shocked. So she was essentially calling to A, tell me about that, and B, talk to me about how much money I wanted for it. And I had no idea what you even price something like that as. It had never been anything that I had actually had any experience in, but I knew I wanted to like have something like that one day. And the funny thing is that they technically, I don't think needed to pay me because I was hourly and all of my work was work for hire. So they owned all of the work outright anyway. So they could have technically paid me like the 2 hours that I spent on the design. So they could have paid me $42. And after a lengthy discussion with Matt and also my boss, she was able to get me a number significantly higher than the amount that I asked for. And it essentially paid for our move to Portland. And I am so grateful for my boss for being an advocate for me as an artist, and also to Dave Grohl for wanting to pay me the amount that he did, especially during a time when nobody wanted to pay graphic designers. So we moved to Portland in August of 2020 because I knew that I was never going to be brought back in-house for Live Nation. You guys know, you guys lived it. And because there was no one hiring, I really had to force myself to figure out freelancing. And I didn't want to do it. Genuinely, I was not ready. And if you want to learn more about like my first few years in detail about freelancing, you can go watch my welcome back video. I talk more about it in depth there. But at the time, I had mapped out all of the merchandise agencies and I had begun emailing everybody from their team. So I wanted to be added to freelance rosters. So the second they had any work come in, they could put me on those projects. And slowly but surely, tiny projects would come through here and there. And the merchandise department that I was a part of at Live Nation had been bought out by another company. So all of the people that I used to work with who weren't furloughed got bought out and had to work for this other company. And eventually, one by one, they started jumping ship and going to other agencies. So as artists started releasing albums again, merchandise was needed and people needed to design that merchandise. So the people that I had worked with who now work for all these other agencies started hiring me because we worked together for years at Live Nation together. And the main agency I was hired with, and it was the agency that I wanted to work with so badly, was Bravado. They are a merchandise company under Universal Music Group, and they were the main rival to the Live Nation merchandise department that I worked for. And because everybody started leaving these other companies, they started to go to Bravado. So the Bravado team started to resemble the old Live Nation team. And that ultimately worked out really well for me because they wanted to work with me again. So if you want to know more, go watch my other video. But essentially, when I first started out freelancing, the faucet kind of like turned on and I didn't know how to turn it off, or at least like how to handle the flow of work. And I signed my first like major big time NDAs, and I started working with like my dream clients under those NDAs. And at first, this was really hard for me because I need external validation to feel like a good designer, but also as a freelancer, if I can't include something in my portfolio, it's going to be hard for me to get work. But, you know, I started to embrace it because I saw some of the silver lining benefits, the main one being that I could do this stuff privately in secrecy without kind of like the external pressure from the world. And it kind of like kept a distance between myself and the fans. And for some really big artists, it's kind of nice to have that buffer between myself and the fans. So with all of this, I started to, for the first time, really within like the past year or so, it hit me that I have reached the top of the mountain. And this was the top of the mountain that I had wandered so long for, searching, getting so lost, I'm on the wrong trail, going in the wrong direction. We're going back down to home base. Like, I was so lost. And now I get to turn on my computer in my house, working for myself, and I see a list of clients that if you told me I would have them in my inbox now, like 6 years ago, I would have thought you've lost your mind, and I've lost my mind. I'm in a coma, I'm in a science experiment, and they're playing sick little Matrix games in my head. And I think back, especially when I was like writing the general script for this video, going back and reliving those experiences that I had really kind of like not like triggered me, but like thinking back on the number of tears that I shed and the panic attacks that I had and doing the most mindless, boring, meaningless, useless, drab, Z-tier client list work and continuously overdrawing my bank account because I never, ever made enough money to pay all my bills every month. And it was also horrible that I wanted to quit forever. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and trying to think of like what kept me going through everything and reflecting on myself just as a person. And what I've learned is that my creativity is something that is so special, is something that will always be mine, and it is something that makes me who I am. And that there were a lot of situations and positions that I was put in as a young designer where I didn't have the right creative outlet that I needed or the people around me that I needed to thrive. And I think my constant search for that right creative outlet is what kept me going. I needed to create no matter the cost. It's the one thing that I can always guarantee will bring me my truest sense of joy. And I love art. I love making things. And I think there were people that I worked for, particularly my boss at my job where I made my print mistake, saw something in me that my next boss would see as a good thing. But I think the woman before that, I think she saw that I had a passion for art and design, and I think she envied it. And she tried to take that from me. She tried to put the fire in me out. And I'm so glad that I didn't let her win. And in the off chance that she's watching this, off chance but not unlikely chance, because I know she's obsessed with me. I know you're keeping tabs on me. And I know she'd be someone who would be quick to claim my success as someone who walked through her doors and like, I don't know, she imprinted her practices on me or whatever. The things you did to me hurt me in a way that I am still working through in therapy years later. But you did not break me. And I was the one who found the success that I did through my hard work, through my passion, through my creativity. I am who I am now. And you don't get to claim any role in that. That was all me, and you tried to take that away from me. I am who I am because I am stubborn as shit. And I just kept going. And I pushed on for a bit out of spite to prove to her that I was worth so much more than the young and naive designer that she emotionally destroyed for hours on end, privately in conference rooms. I am so creative. I am so talented. I am so passionate. And I am my truest self now because I was given the tools that I needed to succeed by people who cared about my well-being and my creativity. And you didn't get that, and you lack that. So, and I don't want to make this about her because it's not. It's about me. But I think I've learned so much about myself, and thinking about the experiences that I had, those experiences make me who I am. They are how I learned things about my profession and also just about myself. And so I think it's worth talking about, and to heed warning to young and up-and-coming designers that there are going to be people like this. And I worked for a lot of people like this, but I can tell you that there are good people in this industry and you will eventually find them. And I went through so much hell to get to where I am today, but I am so grateful for all the opportunities that I had. I got to try so many things, but at the same time, it was really hard for me. I was really isolated. I didn't have that many friends. I really was only friends with my coworkers, and it was hard. It was hard for a long time, and I'm finally out the other end. And Chapa Roan said it in one of her interviews recently, where she was saying that you just have to keep going. You just have to keep going. You can't give it up. And I think, especially if you are truly talented, you will find a place for yourself in the industry. And it is a long ride, but you have to keep going. So if you have any horror stories of a boss who truly broke you down to a cellular level and turned you into dust, do let me know down in the comment section below, because I think sharing these experiences is a net positive. We need to talk about these things so we know what is going on in our industry. Let's do a little assessment, a little litmus test on what the hell is going on in the graphic design industry, especially in branding, especially in agency settings. I feel like there's a lot of shit going on there that we don't talk about. The music industry sucks, but it's kind of like to be expected. We know that. We know the entertainment industry is shady and horrible. But a lot of people seem to think that this shit isn't going on in agencies. And it is. And we need to talk about it so we can improve it for the next generation of designers so they don't go through the same things that we went through. I'm sorry if this video ended up turning into a lecture. Well, this was long. I hope you enjoy. My script for this, let's see how long this is. Oh my god, where's my word count? All right, I am at 6,000 words. Yippee! If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give me a like and subscribe to this channel, especially if you're a graphic designer or if you're just like a creative, freaky little guy like me. This is a community for you. I welcome everyone here. This is a community where we vehemently support one another. We are here to protect one another, to give each other resources and educational material so we all can thrive. This is a very welcoming and safe community for all groups except for people who are pieces of fucking shit. But this is a very welcoming community. This is a very gay community. We're gay over here, very gay, a very pro-liberation community. We are a community that believes in a free Palestine. This is a very pro-trans community. This is an anti-capitalist community. We are all here to support one another. None of us are free until we are all free. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'd like to thank you for coming home with me. Goodbye.